Making your morning commute across the Sea of Tranquility. Waking up to a Martian sunrise. Vacationing on Jupiter's moon Europa. Pure science fiction. Or is it?
EGS Program Chief Engineer. Verify no constraints to launch.
EGS Chief Engineer team has no constraints.
I copy that. You are clear to launch.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Power clear. Now passing through max Q, maximum dynamic pressure. Welcome to space.
While the idea of space travel is a staple of countless science fiction novels and motion pictures, the reality is that you, or someone you know, could very well find themselves walking on the surface of Mars in their lifetime. You're listening to The Rocket Ranch, and I am your host, Joshua Santora. 2019 is gearing up to be an exciting year for human space travel here at the Kennedy Space Center. Taking their cues from the shuttle program, which captured the imagination of the world through their last launch in 2011, the Commercial Crew Program, or CCP for short, is poised to reignite that passion. Working in cooperation with NASA, Boeing, alongside United Launch Alliance, and SpaceX, combine their innovative technology with the heritage forged from previous NASA launches. The overarching goal is to, one day soon, make space travel as common and safe as flying on an airplane for everyone on planet Earth. In this episode, I spoke with 3 members of the Commercial Crew Program during their preparation for SpaceX's Demo 1 mission, which successfully launched on March 2nd. First up is the NASA mission manager for SpaceX's uncrewed flight test, Demo 1. All right, welcome. I am in the booth today with Mike Lee of NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Mike, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So give us a little bit of background on what brought you here today and where you came from.
It had always been my dream to be an astronaut. So that's what I decided I wanted to do in high school. I wanted to be an astronaut, and I went to college with that in mind. Had an unforeseen incident happen to me in college that basically made it such that I could not qualify to be an astronaut due to a head injury that I experienced. However, I had already been studying for 3 years as an aerospace engineer, focusing on space, and so I continued that, and then wound up getting a job here at Kennedy Space Center right out of college, and so I moved down here right after that.
People probably have, I hope they've heard about the Commercial Crew Program, but it's so much different than anything NASA's ever done before. How is Commercial Crew so different?
In the Commercial Crew Program and the commercialization approach, the individual companies actually own their hardware, they own their designs, and the government is buying rides on their hardware. This, of course, will keep our nation's ability to stay in space and keep humans in space and expand our capabilities beyond just low Earth orbit, from there to going beyond to the moon and to Mars and potentially other locations.
This is truly an exciting time for human spaceflight in our nation, and believe me, it's only going to get better as we charge off into the future.
It will also allow the advancement and development of science that exists on the space station today.
And is there some application for thinking about people who live across America? So why is this important for them? Why should they care about this?
Well, because these commercial providers exist and consist not only of themselves, not only of Boeing and SpaceX, but also of their contractors and their subcontractors and their partners. And so because of that, they engage companies across the United States. So you're keeping many people employed, returning energy and business back into the United States and achieving the goals that the United States has set. So again, we're trying to keep all this capability domestically within the United States without having to vector our funds to outside countries to be able to achieve the goals of the program.
Together, we're delivering on the critical task of providing a capability to fly our crews on a U.S.-built rocket and spacecraft from U.S. soil on Florida's Space Coast to the International Space Station, so we no longer have to rely on our Russian partners to get our crews to space.
To be involved in that is inspiring. And if I look back on an equivalent time back in the early 1900s, and think about the people that were involved in the transition of government aircraft to commercialization of aircraft, and look at where commercialization of aircraft is today as a huge industry, to think that I'm involved in that part of a transition in space is just really cool.
Do you see a future where what we know to be true of the commercial airline market becomes true of the space traveling market?
Sure, why not? I would imagine in the nearer term, you're going to get low Earth orbit flights, suborbital flights, where people are able to fly from one continent to another in a matter of a few hours. Over time, I think we're going to possibly develop hotels in space. I know there's been some discussion of that in other areas. And so in order to be able to do that, you're going to have a way to get people there. And so sure, as an industry develops, I think the transportation of people to space is going to develop right along with it.
So in order to buy that ride, I would assume that we have standards that have to be met for us to be okay putting a human on board. So what does that process look like, and how do those standards get set? How are they established?
Yeah, so we have a set of requirements that were levied on the contractors or on the providers, both Boeing and SpaceX, for them to build their spacecraft to, in order to be able to certify their hardware for carrying humans on board. So we levied those requirements. They propose what their designs are, and that's what the government does. That's what Commercial Crew Program does. We stay along with them during their design to make sure that they're actually staying compliant with what those requirements are, to be able to make sure that humans are able to fly safely on their spacecraft.
So are we dictating things to them as they're developing?
So we identify what the requirements are that they have to meet, but we don't dictate what their design is to be able to meet those requirements. The requirement, for example, to be able to return humans safely from Earth orbit.
Obviously, getting there is half the task. Getting home is the second half. So
exactly,
kind of a big deal.
Yeah, a big deal. The method by which that return occurs could be a land landing or a water landing, or landing under a parachute or landing under wings. So the implementation is different. The objective to get people safely back to Earth is what the common thing is. What does the rocket look like? What does the spacecraft itself look like? What are the capabilities within the spacecraft? Capabilities are fairly requirements driven, but the providers actually have the ability to vary some of what they can provide. They can go above and beyond what is being required from a government perspective, for example.
And so thinking about where you guys started and where you are today, can you give us kind of a brief flyby of the history of the program? How did we get to this point where we're about to see two companies start launching spacecraft?
So back in around 2010, we had several Space Act agreements called SAAs with multiple companies across the nation. Those were essentially study contracts where they came up with initial design ideas. Those initial design ideas were developed to a certain level of maturity, and those were down selected ultimately to the final two, Boeing and SpaceX, in 2014. As we went through the initial parts of those SAAs, we had several different design concepts: capsules, winged vehicles, and again, the down select occurred in 2014 for the two primary competitors that had the most successful design implementations to achieve the mission objectives and minimize risk, essentially, to achieve that.
So, Mike, you mentioned primary, and I want to kind of ping on that for a second. So are there secondary partners we're working with? So
there are other partners that we're working with. The original group of competitors under the SAAs, two of them are still continuing on. One of them is Sierra Nevada, and the other one is Blue Origin. So although neither Sierra nor Blue actually won the commercial crew contract, they do continue on performing operations under their own SAAs. They are actually doing their own internal development to continue the ability for human spaceflight down their own paths. Although they're not getting funded by the government at this point in time, they're continuing to do those study works. They're also interacting with the government so that we have data exchange, and engineering types of level of discussions between us and Blue Origin and Sierra Nevada.
So is there a difference in the assistance that we're providing Boeing and SpaceX as opposed to Sierra Nevada and Blue Origin?
Well, with Sierra Nevada and Blue, we don't have requirements that we have levied on them. So they're no longer designing to the commercial crew program requirements that we have levied. We do provide engineering level communication with them. So if they have questions regarding design solutions, we can give them what our experience is. We can talk to them about what our experiences is in these similar areas. We can't, again, levy requirements on them, so we can't tell them that whether or not they're meeting our requirements because we haven't levied any on them. But we do maintain the ongoing engineering discussions with them. They use the data that they gather from those discussions to develop their own designs. With Boeing, with SpaceX, we maintain those interactions, but our communications with them is not intended to drive their design. So again, we can look at what their design is, identify whether or not their designs are meeting our requirements or not, but we don't give them what their design solution needs to be.
So thinking about commercial crew from this point forward, obviously 2019 is an enormous year for commercial crew. What's 2019 look like?
2019 is going to be real busy for us. Every few months, essentially, we've got a launch flying for commercial crew from Kennedy Space Center to the space station.
And I understand that you're kind of helping call the shots here for this first one. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm the mission manager for the SpaceX Demo 1 mission. Demo 1 is going to be the first flight of the SpaceX's crewed Dragon vehicle, although in this particular flight, it's a test flight and will not have a crew on board. It will still be flying to the space station and still dock to the space station, where we plan on transferring cargo off the spacecraft. And then at the end of the mission, transferring cargo back to the spacecraft and bringing it back to the ground.
And so what exactly is your role as the mission manager? That's an awesome title. What's your function?
So I'm responsible for coordinating the ground support and ground activities for the launch. Then I am also responsible for being a primary interface to the space station program during on-orbit operations. So we're engaged as interfacing between the station program and the provider, SpaceX, to ensure that all the objectives are achieved on the mission. If there are any issues identified during the execution of the mission, we help and resolve any of those problems and make sure we've got the right folks engaged to resolve any issues that may come up.
Thinking about objectives for the mission, what are it may be too many to kind of list them all, but what are the main things that we're really keeping a close eye on before we get to flying crews?
So we're trying to use a somewhat of a building block approach before we fly crew on the next mission, which is the Demo 2 mission. We want to make sure that the spacecraft operates the way that it's supposed to, and it operates safely such that the crew on board in Demo 2 will survive, of course. So we do things such as some demonstrations as we're approaching the space station to make sure that the spacecraft is controllable, can be operated in such a way that it can approach the space station safely. It can back away if necessary under control.
On board the station, 2 astronauts, Canadian David St. Jacques and NASA astronaut Anne McLean, inside monitoring the vehicle. You'll hear them refer to the RPOP, which is the Rendezvous Proximity Operations Program. That's just the name of the program that they're using on a laptop inside of the station to actually monitor Dragon. And as they just demonstrated a little while ago, the crew has the ability to send commands to make Dragon hold or retreat or even abort if they see anything that looks a little out of sorts with its approach. But everything going real smoothly so far. We should be just about 2 minutes away.
That it can actually perform a successful docking and mating with the space station.
Capture confirmed. Station confirmed.
You can hear the cheers behind us at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. We have confirmation of a soft capture of the Dragon spacecraft to the International Space Station.
Also, while we're docked to the space station, the crew on board the space station will be stowing equipment, transferring equipment back and forth to the space station, as well as demonstrating some of their operational procedures on orbit. And at the end of the mission, we unberth or undock from the space station and perform a safe departure and a return.
And so we know that there's no people on board this mission. So is somebody on the ground with a joystick flying this thing, or how does that work?
So during the performance of this mission, the great deal of the operations of the spacecraft are automated. So as the spacecraft approaches the space station, the docking is a automated function to a certain degree, although there is override capability from the people that are on the ground. There is also communication with the space station so that the folks on board space station are able to see and monitor the spacecraft as it approaches, as well as seeing the telemetry that comes from the spacecraft.
A lot of people may be thinking, Cargo Dragon, Crew Dragon, no big deal. You just put a seat in there, right? And you fly somebody on board. Is it harder than that?
It is harder than that, yeah. There are life support systems that have to fly on the Crew Dragon that aren't present on the Cargo Dragon. You also have to factor in the sensitivity of the human body to G-forces. And so the forces that are exerted on the Crew Dragon is going to be different than the forces that are exerted on the Cargo Dragon due to the nature of the flight profile that is followed, and also what is capable of the cargo on board versus people on board.
And past 2019, obviously for SpaceX, we mentioned a few missions in there. We know that Demo 1 and Demo 2 are big milestones for certification, but what happens past 2019?
So after certification, we start flying what generically is called the post-certification missions. So far with SpaceX, we have 3 of them baseline, Crew 1, Crew 2, and Crew 3. They are scheduled to fly on about 1-year intervals. Likewise, for Boeing, also you have 2 pre-certification missions, the first one being an uncrewed mission, the second one being a crewed mission. Then after that one, we go into certification. And so then you also have post-flight or post-certification missions on the Boeing side as well.
Mike, as you think about the day coming up where we're going to be launching, what are the things that, where does your mind go? Is this an exciting time? Are you nervous? Like, what's this like from a human perspective to know that we're about to start flying commercial crew?
It's all of those things. It's a little bit of nerves. It's very exciting. As we watch, again, the first mission of this design, of this crewed capability, it's very exciting because we're on the front end of a big step forward for us as a nation. It's nerve-wracking a little bit because it is the first flight of something new. Fortunately, most of this has been demonstrated, or a lot of this technology has been demonstrated previously by SpaceX. So there are new modifications that are flying in this design, but a lot of it is being demonstrated before it actually reaches the point of launching. So we have fairly high confidence of the success of this mission, but it's still a little bit nerve-wracking.
And so, Mike, I don't want to dig into your personal life too much, but obviously like a little bit of heartburn probably over missing out on an opportunity to be an astronaut. But you're here today helping to enable astronauts in spaceflight. Thinking about the people who may be listening who either have a dream or have missed out on a dream or lost a dream, what would you encourage them with as far as their pursuit of working for NASA or other things of that nature?
I would totally encourage anyone who has a dream or a goal to pursue that goal as far as you can. The only thing that will stop you from achieving that kind of a goal is closing doors on yourself, really. And if a door closes, then you look for another open door. Go down a path of advancing your education so that you can achieve greatness.
Mike, I want to just say thank you. Appreciate you being here today. And good luck this coming year. It's a big year for you. I know you're going to do great.
Thank you so much.
We wanted to make sure you knew we had a lot of successful milestones during that mission, including docking, testing while attached to station, undocking, re-entry, and splashdown. We're looking forward to seeing their future successes as they continue working alongside the Commercial Crew program. Next up is Carol Scott, who serves as the Deputy Manager at the Launch Vehicle Office for CCP. As one of the original members of the program, she gives us a first-hand account of how Commercial Crew has grown and adapted since its inception. All right, I am joined now by Carol Scott. Carol, thank you so much for joining me. We are in the throes of getting ready for a rocket launch. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here.
All right, so I am the deputy for the Launch Vehicle System Office here within the Commercial Crew program, and it's my job to be able to help this incredible team that I have that's loaded with engineers and safety personnel to be able to certify our two partners, SpaceX and Boeing, certify their rockets so that they'll be ready to take crew members up to space station and be able to do future missions for us along that are associated with space station.
Carol, so tell me about yourself and kind of how you got here. I know it's an interesting story that's related to aeronautics, which is definitely near and dear to NASA's heart, but definitely a non-traditional path to get here.
I grew up in Warner Robins, Georgia.
Oh, nice. Were you a NASA kid growing up?
No, I was not a NASA kid, but I was an aviation kid. My dad is a pilot, he's a private pilot. My dad built his own airplane. He's built two. We had our own plane while I was growing up. Nothing fancy or anything, but, to get you from point A to point B. We would go to Oshkosh, and every year that was our family vacation. And I've even slept under the wing. Okay, I have pictures of that. Cool. And so I grew up in this aviation world all my life and all. So I will tell you, I am a third generation engineering graduate at Mississippi State University. And my grandfather went there. He was a mechanical engineer. My great uncle went there. He was an electrical engineer. My dad was aeronautical. They didn't have aerospace at that time. And then myself, a chemical engineer. So one of my really good friends that I co-opted with, her sister worked here. And so it was right after Challenger. So she was getting on with NASA. She was also a chemical engineer from USF. And she was able to get me a job interview here, which was a phone interview, right? And so, I'm talking to my potential supervisor, and he's offering me a job right over the phone. And
awesome.
I was like, well, can I come see the place, right? So I come out here for a tour. I'm crawling around inside of Columbia at the time. We went inside Atlantis, inside the VAB. And I remember coming out of Atlantis and just going, oh my God, where do I sign up? And you get paid to do this too, right? It was pretty incredible.
So he definitely gave you the sell on the tour there.
I don't think there was any selling. I think the orbiter kind of sold itself. And then, we're sitting down at the dinner table and just talking about stuff. My parents, they had no idea, that I'd been out here or, they knew I was looking for something else. And I told my dad, I said, hey, I was crawling around, inside the space shuttle this past week, and I'm going to go work for NASA. And I'm telling you, literally, my dad, he had his fork, here in the mouth, literally fell to the floor. So I've never, ever surprised my, family or my dad like that before. But anyway, so yeah, and it's been awesome ever since. I have never, I've always loved working out here. This has been, working at KSC is super incredible between all the, the rocket stuff that goes on here, all the wildlife. The coolest part is the people, right?
Sure.
The people are awesome.
Sure.
So
for commercial crew, has your role evolved since you've been a part of the program?
Yeah. So when I first came in, I was kind of more on, I would say, the program side. So one of my jobs to start off with focused on strategic communications, coming up with a logo, coming up with, how to interface with the partners, how to go have the meetings that we needed to have, with the partners, how to tell our story to Congress so that they would understand that this is the next logical step, and a very vital step for not only just for NASA, but this is what, the United States should go do next, right?
Kennedy Space Center has made an amazing transformation, transitioning from a single government program-funded installation to a true multi-user spaceport of the future.
I did that for a year, and then it was time for me to go back and do some more technical work. So I went back to what was the ground systems, and I say ground and launch systems, and started working with the planning and that interface to the commercial partners. Basically, to answer your question, I went from working the ground and launch systems to coming over and becoming the deputy manager for the launch vehicle office.
So are you working with Boeing and SpaceX, or one more heavily than the other?
So no, I would say it's pretty even. We do try. So I know my area of emphasis is with Boeing and ULA. Right. And then we have Steve Gaddis, who works on the SpaceX side. But we find out we got to help each other out, right? Let me tell you, when you get really close to being ready to launch, there's a lot of work to be done. So our office had started off with trying to work both partners, but not be assigned specifically just to one. It takes all of us to do this. This one definitely takes a village to go make this work.
Yeah. So what does that work look like day to day? Are you reviewing documents? Are you talking to the partners? What are you doing?
So I would say more doing a lot of strategic planning, talking with the partners, interfacing with them a lot, interfacing with our office to make sure that the work that we need to have done, we have a plan or a schedule. It's really hard to get it out beyond about 60 days at this point because the work comes in, the work's got to come in, and then you're going to have issues or questions and all about, the work that's coming in. And so you have a lot of dialogue with the partners.
So is it fair to say you're kind of shepherding the process of helping make sure that like all the people play their role and all the people get everything done that needs to get done?
I would say that, yeah. And I would say guiding too, right?
Okay.
Guiding, and then I try to stay out ahead of them so that I keep them working toward, the strategic plan that's out here, right? And trying to keep ahead of them with the goals so that, we're actually getting to where we need to be. So, yeah, a little bit of that.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of planning out ahead. Obviously, we're right here on top of Demo 1, our first commercial crew launch, which is great. So are you still kind of planning out? Because obviously the mission isn't done
oh my God.
when we fly Demo 1.
No, okay, so yes, I've got a real intense team going on right now with Demo 1, right? Trying to make sure you're getting through all the reviews to say, yes, we can go fly. So, and then at the same time, I've got another team working on OFT, and that's the the Boeing ULA launch. So, I'm trying to get them to start their engineering assessments of how is this rocket getting ready to fly, right? And so, and then at the same time, we have another team that's working on Demo 2, that's doing all the planning for Demo 2. And the work that we need to do for Demo 2 has got to be, one of the things we're seeing is let's put a little more logic into what we work first, right? And I know that sounds easy, but when you've got a lot of data coming in, you kind of got to sort through it and go, hey, I need to do this chunk first, chunk A, before I go do chunk B, know? And so we're doing a little bit more planning of that way to be able to go manage it. And then but with all of that, you got to go deconflict, right? Make sure your resources aren't, you're not stretching them too thin, and then that they can actually go do this work. Because there's a lot of, obviously with launch vehicles, a lot of propulsion. There's a lot of work on the prop side. And so that's the group we got to make sure is able to get it done and not have them on top of each other. So
I'm asking you now to kind of imagine the future a little bit, because obviously we don't know until we fly, but how much do you think that the data from Demo 1 will really impact that process? Because I could see that that things could go like swimmingly, everything's perfect and it's great, or it's like kind of there are issues, and you got to kind of take steps back to deal with those.
Josh, I'm going to tell you, every week we learn something. Right. And it's
only every week?
Really. It's not until the end of the week that you realize, all right, you start off with this plan on Monday, and by Thursday you're doing some adjustment. But, that's when you have test flight. What's the cool thing about test flight? You find stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so you all know, you don't know exactly what that issue is, but there's going to be something, and it's going to be fun to work on. It's going to be something exciting. It's going to drive you crazy. But you got to go fix that, and so you just kind of put a little block in your plan. All right, whatever this unknown is, I got to go do that.
Do you build in a block for unknown things like that? Or do you just like subconsciously do that, knowing it's going to happen?
I kind of do it more subconsciously.
Okay.
It's hard to put on paper the block of unknown when the program manager wants to go, you can't do that. What is that? Why don't you know that? So, but I know from experience, right? I know experience from shuttle, from doing Ares 1X, you always have those unknown unknowns, right? That's what part of test flight is. That's what's the fun part of it. Yeah, there's constant learning all the time. The partner is doing what we did in shuttle, right? They're the ones that are, loading it up and, flipping switches or, making sure it's going to be able to go launch. Our role is more of a advisory, making sure that the requirement set that we set up for, that they are working within that, box, for lack of a better word, and that it is safe to go fly that day. So that's what our job is. My role is more of the management side, leading up to like L-4 hours. And if there's any kind of issues that have got to be resolved, I've got to make sure the team can go do that. But after when the launch support team starts up, then that's that real small scoped engineering team that's under the direction of Steve Stitch of our program. And that's when that gets invoked. I'll tell you what I'm doing right now is because in case the unknown happens, right? And that cool problem's going to sneak out. So I'm working on contingency planning of, all right, making sure I've got, Group B ready to come in. So when the A team is off because they've been working all night, I've got B team set up, to go work the issues.
And B team, not the lesser team, just the next team.
Just the next team, right. The next team, I know I was trying to figure out what else to kind of call them there, but have them ready to go so that they can make sure the issue's getting resolved while the folks on, that worked the night before are able to sleep, and we can, get ready for the next attempt. So, like I said, always that constant planning kind of going on.
And we know we've talked about this very different role that NASA is playing in these launches. How do you characterize in summary this mission? Is it a NASA mission?
So I would say it is all of it. Okay, so it's a NASA mission. This one is a SpaceX mission. But more importantly, this is a mission for the United States of America. This is for all of us.
I'll tell you, being able to launch to the International Space Station from U.S. soil, I can't imagine a better honor, and we're ready.
So it is an introduction test flight to be able to go get crews to ISS, right? So initially from the NASA standpoint, and that's what it is. For SpaceX, this is probably proving out that eventually they can go have, their tourists to go, whether it's to Mars or the moon, wherever SpaceX wants to go, take people. This is providing that avenue for them. And then I'm going to tell you from the bigger all of us picture standpoint, this is the only way we're going to get our grandkids or, whatever, have the ability to be able to go into space. And so that's why I say it's more than just NASA. It's more than just SpaceX. It's for all of us so that eventually we're getting space flight as common as air travel is today.
Awesome. Well, Carol, I appreciate you being with me today. Good luck to you and your entire team.
Oh, thank
Obviously,
you.
It's going to be an exciting couple of weeks here, but I'm sure busy, but lots of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it too.
On our last podcast, we said we'd answer a question from a listener. So we wanted to tackle this one on Twitter from Tesla Prince. On average, how long does an astronaut spend on the ISS on any given mission? Well, the truth is, it varies pretty widely. With the shuttle program, we saw stays as short as 7 or 10 days, but most expeditions on station are spent up there for about 6 months at a time. Astronaut Scott Kelly spent almost a full year up there for science research. Great question. Despite beginning her career toward the end of the shuttle program, Misty Snupkowski carried over a youthful energy into her role as the launch site integrator for commercial crew. Working directly with SpaceX, she spoke with me about the joys and challenges she faces leading up to launch. All right, so I am joined now by Misty Snupkowski. We are on the brink of launching the first ever commercial crew launch. Misty, thank you for making time for us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So we're obviously talking about commercial crew and Demo 1, which is the first flight of SpaceX's Crew Dragon, which is super exciting. So what job do you hold right now? What are you doing for commercial crew?
So now I am in the group that's called Ground and Mission Operations. Our nickname's GMO. I was against that, but it kind of stuck.
Which we could spend days talking about, like naming procedures and acronyms, but
yes.
let's not.
So GMO, is the short name for the office. But essentially, my role is the technical integrator for GMO. So what that means is, because the scope of B group is so big, it covers launch operations, mission operations, and recovery operations. And so they really needed somebody as an integrator to kind of look across all the operations and make sure that all our requirements and standards were being integrated properly, and just kind of have that big integrated picture for all the operations.
Cool. So you kind of get to play make it all work together. Is that kind of a fair way to summarize that?
Yeah, and it's a pretty big job because we have the folks here at Kennedy who obviously are involved more in the ground and launch ops portion of it, and then we have our major stakeholders over in Houston who are obviously very heavily involved in the mission operations side when we're actually flying in space, and then there's the recovery portion, which is kind of a mix of Houston. And then obviously SpaceX is involved in the recovery part as well, and that's out here again in the Atlantic. So it's a big job. I should probably also, I don't know if I mentioned that, but within the GMO org, there's my position on SpaceX, and then there's another one for Boeing. So
Gotcha.
I'm exclusively responsible for the SpaceX operations.
Tell me about being a kid and growing up. You always wanted to work in the space industry?
I don't know if I always wanted to work in the space industry, just because, I mean, when you're little, you don't really know what that means.
I wanted to be a motorcycle policeman. That was my thing.
Yeah.
So did you have like a thing?
I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals. Right?
Awesome.
Yeah. It probably wasn't until like high school time frame where I started learning like what an engineer is through my physics teacher. And so that kind of struck my interest. And then I was always a huge fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Okay, very good. I mean, who's not?
Right. So, so that was always a fun thing for me in high school. And then I just kind of found out what an aerospace engineer was, and that seemed like a cool thing to do. So I started pursuing that and learning more about what that would entail. And then that's what I ended up majoring in.
And so what does your job look like on a daily basis? Are you spending time in meetings? Are you doing design work? Are you evaluating things? Like, obviously, like we'll talk about approaching launch week, but not approaching launch week. What's kind of a normal week or day look like?
It's kind of a mix of all that. You know, there is the program side of it where you're in meetings at the program control board or engineering review board. Leading up to this time frame, we've had several milestones with SpaceX as far as the designs go. Because also what's included in my roles and responsibilities is making sure that the launch site, Pad A, or LC-39A, as some folks might know it as, that all gets designed according to our requirements that we need for crew as well. So we had several what we called launch site operational readiness reviews with SpaceX, where we went over all their designs. There is some fun stuff in the day-to-day too, where you'll get to go out to the pad and actually do walkdowns of the pad or see how they perform their vehicle processing. So those are always fun days. And then also along the way, we've observed a lot of their static fire and launch operations. So that's always fun to get behind a console and see how they're doing that operation as well. So it's not always in the conference rooms, but sometimes we get to do some fun things out in the field.
So just asking you very personally, is that a disappointment? Like, is the work for NASA all that you had hoped that it would be?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the things I've gotten to do in my whole career have been really awesome, really, like more than I could have ever expected. I mean, just to say, you know, to tell you my career history and to say that I got to fly the last shuttle launch and then I was part of a brand new program that got stood up. There's not a lot of people that get that kind of opportunity in their career. So I do feel very fortunate to experience that. And just seeing all the things that this company, SpaceX, because that's who I'm closest with at this point, but just to see all the things that they've accomplished in the last few years under TCAP has been amazing.
Yeah, and so what's life been like leading up to launch? So
oh my God,
kind of a little bit of everything in the day-to-day, but obviously when we get close to launch, it's a whole different game.
Yeah, it's been insane. You know, and a lot of it is because this is our first launch as a program too. So, you know, we're kind of figuring a lot of things and learning a lot of things as we go. But yeah, it's been the last, I would say, 2 months have been pretty intense just trying to get to this point. You know, once the hardware, and I kind of knew this already because shuttle was kind of the same way, but once the hardware gets to Kennedy Space Center, like that's when things turn on around here.
Yeah.
And kick into a different gear. And so you kind of step away from the paperwork aspect of it and you're more trying to follow what's happening with the hardware and getting that vehicle stacked. I think it was right before the end of last year. We were mating the vehicles, and then as soon as we got back from the new year, we had folks here on the 2nd working so that we could get ready to roll out the vehicle and do the first dry dress. So I think the public saw all that when the vehicle rolled out to the pad. But and ever since then, it's just been like super high speed. We had a static fire. A couple weeks ago, maybe it's a little bit more than that now, but it all kind of blurs together.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really excited about the launch happening. Like, it's been a long time to get to this point. A lot of work, and sometimes it's kind of funny, like sitting here, like thinking about it. You've just kind of been in the mix of it, like running as hard as we can.
Yeah, next Saturday.
Yeah,
like that's weird to say, right?
Yeah. And the team's been getting ready. We've fit in some sims since the beginning of the year to get the launch team ready. So it's pretty exciting to be this close.
So Misty, thinking about launch day, very early morning, where are you planning to be when we fly?
That's a good question. I was actually just talking about this morning. So,
which again, things you have to figure out when you're launching a vehicle for the first time.
Yeah. Well, so by design, I'm not going to be in the control room. SpaceX is the operator for this mission, but there is a whole NASA team that's supporting our launch manager, who's going to be Steve Stitch. For this mission, and so there's a team behind him that's giving him inputs to anything that might be happening during the count. But that's mostly an engineering team that have helped stand up and get them ready. I'll probably be over in Hangar AE. It's a big facility that we use for NASA to house some of the folks who are around during day of launch. So that's probably where I'll be.
Good. And so will you be playing a specific role, or will you really just be kind of enjoying this? Are you watching data? What's your function at that point?
I don't have a specific day of launch function.
Okay.
Like I said, that's mostly covered by the engineering teams. So I'm probably more just there for moral support than to be with the team, right? Like, we're at this very end point, and so kind of want to be with everybody when it happens.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How much do you interface with SpaceX? Or is it more focused on working with our NASA team to make sure things are in order?
I talk to them like every day, all throughout the day. To be able to like pull something like this off, you have to have a pretty good working relationship with your counterparts. And we've got folks that are here, local from SpaceX. I talk to people at SpaceX in Houston and then also in Hawthorne. So over the years, you kind of form a pretty good working relationship with them. But yeah, we talk all the time.
And you mentioned that your work kind of focuses on the launch pad,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of things going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking from a uneducated perspective, how complicated is a launch pad? Because there's on one hand, like I'm like, you just need a big mound to like fire a rocket into space off of.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I'm like, there's no way it's that simple.
No, it's pretty complicated. So, SpaceX wasn't starting with a complete, just mound of concrete. They inherited the old shuttle launch site, so they already kind of had a pretty good foundation there. But if you were to walk out there today and look at that pad compared to when the shuttle was flying, it looks very different now. But as far as all the systems out there, you have to think about every system that's on board the vehicle has a ground interface to it. And so when you put it in that context, you start to think about, okay, all the fluid connections that have to be made at the launch site going into the vehicle, all the electrical connections, all the command and control. There's also the sound suppression system out there when it launches to catch all the sound vibrations. From a crew perspective, they had to add the crew access arm, which is a pretty beefy, complicated hydraulic system. The emergency egress system is also being installed out there for the crew. There's also all the supporting GSC just to get the vehicle out there. They call that the transporter erector. So that's a really big, complex piece of GSC that had to get designed and built. So and the thing is, it's kind of funny that you give that perspective on the launch site, because if that's the case, if people think that, then we did our job right. Because from our perspective, the launch site should just be ready.
Yeah.
We shouldn't think about it.
Yeah.
And the vehicle should just arrive. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So just kind of spitball, and I know that this would be, that you're kind of just spitballing a number here, at least I think you would. How many systems are we talking about? You talk about each one needs an integration point on the ground. Like, how many systems are in a rocket?
Oh, man. If I had to, like, put a swag on it, you know, just kind of thinking about all the lead engineers that I have on the ground, there's probably, like, between, you know, if we were to hash it up, maybe 35 to 40 different subsystems.
Okay.
But we group them into probably 4 or 5 major systems. So we got the fluids, and that's a huge system, just because there's so many different types of fluids. There's the electrical, the command and control, and mechanical, which is also a pretty big, beefy area. But under those 4 titles, there's a whole bunch of other things happening under there. And then you have to think also what we call facilities, which is kind of like where the water comes from. So, you know, Kennedy Space Center will supply the water, or where we call, you know, big power comes from, AC power. So those things fall into what we call facilities out here. And so that's a whole nother area of things that get supplied to the launch site. So there's a lot going on out there that most people don't realize.
And is there any area that you in particular have focused on in your time?
No, within the program, I've always played more of the integration role for all that. So, if an issue comes up in a particular system, then, you know, we go off and work it. But from a program perspective, I'm more the integrator for everything.
So what does the commercial crew program mean for you? Kind of thinking about its goals and vision and mission. What does that mean to Misty?
You know, because I was hired on at the very beginning of the program, it did kind of take a little bit of like shifting your mindset on what your purpose was compared to shuttle, because the goals of commercial crew are more to spawn a new industry for space, and kind of teach these commercial providers on how to do human space flight. And it's kind of one of those things where you know, you're the mama bird and you want the baby birds to go off and do this on their own eventually, right? And so, you know, that took a little while to, I think, everyone in the program to kind of adjust to kind of go into the program with that mindset. And I was actually just thinking about this a couple of days ago, but like looking back from when we first started to where we are now, and just kind of reading the headlines and all the news about all these different space companies that are out there doing it, and wanting to start to provide services for just regular folks is pretty cool to be able to kind of like see that progression happen. And I think that was like the one big goal of commercial crew. And then obviously the other goal is to get these vehicles done so that we can launch our own astronauts. So that's how I see the program and its purpose. That's what I think about when I'm doing my job every day. You know, how can I help these providers to get where they need to be so that they can get certified and do this on their own?
So a really important question. If you could be any character on Star Trek Next Generation, who would it be?
Oh my goodness. Geordi was always my favorite.
Who doesn't love Geordi?
Yeah. He had those cool glasses, which you don't really know what they ever did. But
that's right. Doesn't matter. They're really cool.
Yeah.
All right, Misty, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I like to think of launch days as payoff days for years of hard work. Nothing provides a jolt of energy like seeing your work fly into space.
Right.
So good luck to you and your team and the entire program. And thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm Joshua Santora, and that's our show. But before you go, remember that we would like to hear from you, our listeners. Do you have a question about space exploration? Tweet us your question using the hashtag RocketRanch, and we'll plan to answer a listener's question at the end of the next episode. Also, please be sure to subscribe to the Rocket Ranch so you never miss an episode, and tell your friends. Thanks for stopping by the Rocket Ranch, and special thanks to our guests, Mike Lee, Carol Scott, and Misty Snipkowski. As always, a big thanks to our producer, John Sackman, soundmen Lauren Maythree and Glenn Benson, editor Michelle Stone, and our production manager, McManus Wooden. And remember, on the Rocket Ranch, even the sky isn't the limit.